If you have a Bible, you might want to turn in the Gospel of John. We've been looking at it to see the words and the actions of Jesus. If not, it's on the screen. It's just one little verse today, not very long, not very much. This is what it says. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Since the 5th chapter of the Gospel of John, Jesus had come out of Galilee. He'd come to Jerusalem. It was the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Harvest. Jesus had been there in Jerusalem, and he had talked with people. Crowds always gathered wherever Jesus went. They always listened to what he said, but many of them with a critical spirit. Many of them with hurt and anger and bitterness, and hatred in their hearts. It's still that same feast, Feast of the Tabernacles. One of the things that happened during the Feast of the Tabernacle, and you might not have heard this, the temple had several courts that were built. And I didn't do this, so ladies, don't shoot me. But they had a court for ladies. And women could go no closer than that court for the ladies. They had a court that was kind of open, and Gentiles could come if they were searching. And then they had another court where the men could enter in. Anybody could go in the first two, but only men could go in that other one. And then, of course, there was the temple itself, and within it was the Holy of Holies. And the high priest could enter it and was to enter it one time a year during Passover to bring an offering for the sins of the whole nation of Israel. But this is the Feast of the Tabernacles. Every year in the Feast of the Tabernacles, when it was going on, there was a special service in the courtyard of the women. They had 4 huge lamps, oil burning. And at a certain time during the feast, they would light those 4 lamps. Feast of Lights. They'd light those 4 lamps. And all the people gathered in the courtyard of the women would sing and dance, and they would have torches, and they would wave them around. And it was a time that was just emotionally high. It was filled with praise songs of God and of joy and celebration, and it was something that they looked forward to every year. It was a celebration and praise of God when they were waving their lights and the lamps were lit. It's against that backdrop that Jesus spoke these words. He's there in the courtyard of the women. Behind him, all of this is going on. Before him, there is a crowd. And he says these simple little words, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, if you've been around the church a while, I know you've heard this. I know you've heard Jesus referred to as the light. But let me ask you a question. Did you ever study it? Did you ever try to figure out what it really means? What he's really talking about here? He's got a particular message, and it's a very important message that he wants to get to us. The Bible abounds with conversations and words about light. But what is it saying? What does it mean to you? And what does it mean to me? It also abounds with references to darkness. You ever looked at that? Figure out what it's talking about. Who lives in darkness? It wasn't until Jesus came that light ever had a reference to anything except God. So it is with some surprise, quite a bit of startled faces, I'm sure, were there when Jesus stood and said, I am the light. Laying a claim that hitherto had only applied to God. Let's look at it. Let's try to understand it. Let's try to grab a hold. Let's start and let's look at darkness. If we're going to look at light, we ought to look at darkness. Let's start and look at darkness. In the 4th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, in the 16th verse, quoting the prophet Isaiah, we read the words, "And the people that dwelt in great darkness," or that dwelt in darkness, "saw a great light." The Bible often refers to our world as a dark world. The Bible often refers to people like you and I and others around us. As a matter of fact, the whole world refers to us as a people who live in darkness. You ever notice that? Ever wonder what was going on? What is the symbolism there? Well, darkness can symbolize several things. It can symbolize something intellectually. If we're talking about darkness from an intellectual perspective, it symbolizes error or falsehood. When you goof, when you live a lie, or tell a lie, participate in a lie, a falsehood, that's intellectual darkness. It can symbolize moral darkness. Moral darkness is sin or error or wrongdoing. So that when we, and the Bible says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, when we sin, and our whole world does, that's moral darkness. Our world is filled with darkness. It can be a spiritual darkness. A spiritual darkness is when we don't know, acknowledge, love, commit to God Himself. It is Satan working in our world to cause us to rebel against God and all of the words of God and all the heart and all the desire of God. Darkness is a part of our world. And Jesus is aware of this. So it's against this backdrop that He's speaking. Now, the Bible says that sinners, or at least it describes sinners, as those who choose darkness. And there are a lot of references to it. I just picked out a few of them. In Proverbs, the 2nd chapter, the 13th verse, it says, "Those who leave the paths of righteousness walk in the ways of darkness." In Romans 1:21, it talks about them and says, "Their foolish heart was darkened." In Ephesians 4:18, it says, "They are darkened in their understanding." In Ecclesiastes 2:14, it says, "The fool walks in darkness." The Bible is abundant in its references to people, average, everyday people who live and walk in darkness. Now, I don't know about you, but I would get tired of that. I would get old to not know God, to not know light, truth, the blessings of God, to live always in the midst of all of those different forms of darkness. That would get old. I would think people would rush to the light when it appears. But if you've paid any attention, you know that isn't really the case for most. That day in the crowd, big crowd, Jesus stands and says, "I am the light." And their response? Their response is, "Oops, you've done wrong." The response is they looked not at the message, not at the significant thing that He was telling them, but they looked to see if they could find something wrong with what He did that they might accuse Him. And in their minds, they found it. They said, "You testified about yourself. If you're the testimony on your own self, you're not doing right. You're doing wrong." And so what they did was, by looking for something wrong in what He said, they totally were able to ignore the truth that Jesus said. And we see that happening all around us every day. Maybe some of you are good at it. I don't know everybody here. What I've discovered is, maybe you have too, it's kind of within our nature to hang on to that which we're familiar with, even if it's wrong, just because we're familiar with it. And what we see in our world all around us is example of that very thing. People who hang on to spiritual darkness rather than light. In a strange paradox, people love that which enslaves them and darkens their lives and their minds. John 5:19 said, "But people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil." The majority of our world struggles and lives in darkness. Now, what we need to do is catch that as a backdrop. If we can understand that in and of and by ourselves, we're always going to be stuck in darkness, then we can better understand what Jesus is trying to say and trying to symbolize and trying to get across to each and every one of us out of love and caring. So we've looked at darkness. Let's look at light. Jesus said, "I am the light. I am the light." There's a lot of meaning and significance in his words. Did you hear what he said? He didn't say, "I am a light." He didn't say, "I've got a part of light." He didn't say, "I'm one of the lights." It was a definitive statement. He said, "I am the light." He's trying to tell us something. He's trying to tell us that he's the only source of light. We're not going to find it anywhere else. We can't go to anywhere else. We can't find it in any other thing. He is the source of spiritual light. Now, here's what that means. That means that all the other religions of our world and all the other philosophies that we hear all the time being spouted by the supposedly wise of our world, they're all portions of darkness. They have no light within them. Why? Because Jesus is the light. He is all the light that there is. In the Old Testament saw God as a source of light. But it held forth this word, Malachi 4:2, that when the Messiah came, he would be a source of light for his people, just like God was. In that phrase, "I'm the light," Jesus is picking up on that reference out of the Old Testament, and he is acknowledging something that the crowd sort of caught, but sort of missed in a real way. He is saying to them, "I'm the Messiah that is supposed to bring light. I'm the Son of God that God has sent into this world to provide light and life for this world." He is laying forth a claim to be exactly who and what he was by saying, "I am the light." John 1:5 says, "The light that shines in the darkness," in reference to Jesus. Did you notice I only gave you the first part of that phrase of what he said? I said, Jesus said, "I am the light." But that's not the whole phrase, is it? Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." Of the world. The Jews had a struggle. Many of us probably are like them. They're self-centered, focused on themselves. As far as they were concerned, when the Messiah came, when the Son of God came, when the light bringer came, he was coming just for the Jews, not for anybody else. It was for them and them alone. What Jesus is declaring here at this great feast in the heart of Judaism, I can't even say the word, during the Feast of the Tabernacles, he was saying, "Yeah, I've come for you, but not just for you. I'm for the persons in every country in the world, of every race, of every nationality, of every language group, of every economic level and educational level, of every age bracket. He said, I am the light for the world, the whole living world. His is a worldwide ministry. And he came to bring spiritual light to you and me and everyone else, regardless of our background, our level of darkness, the actions, the deeds that we've done or we've failed to do, the goodness that is there or the badness that is there. It does not matter. He came to offer light to the entire world. Now, you and I know we've read ahead. You and I know that the same people he's offering this to in just a few months are going to take him out on a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. They're going to crucify him and hang him up before the heaven and the earth, the Son of God, the light of the world, until he dies. You and I know that. He does too. And still he says to them and to us everywhere and in all nations and generations, I came to be the light of the world. Do you begin to catch now what he's saying? He's saying, I'm the light. That's his claim. I'm the light. What that means to you and me is there's no lesser title that is worthy of him. We can't look at him and say, nice guy. I like what he says. He's pretty good. Because he is the light for all the world. And any other title, any other view is missing the heart. And if you miss the heart of it, you miss him. This is who Jesus is. The only way, the only source to God. Those who caught the light understood this. Peter and John were two of his closest followers. After he had been crucified, resurrected, and ascended to stand at the right hand of God in heaven waiting on us, Peter and John, brought to trial because of him, said to the court that had condemned Jesus, the Sanhedrin there in Jerusalem, said to them, there is no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. Another way of saying that is, I am the light of the world. Light. Darkness is everywhere. Light is found in Jesus. So what about you and I? If we know Jesus, we can have light. What about our light? Well, let's acknowledge, first of all, that vast numbers, they never took Jesus' light. Vast numbers of people are still living in darkness in spite of 2,000 years of this story being told over and over and over again. Because vast numbers choose that which they're used to instead of the risk of stepping by faith into light. But some have made that step. And in the continuation of that same 12th verse, you thought I was going to ignore it, but I'm not. Jesus said, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I didn't know it till I went to studying. You may not know it either. I just looked at follow me and I thought, okay, he's talking about putting our faith in him. But in the Greek, the words follow me, and that was the language this was written in. In the Greek, the words follow me, they're powerful. They're talking about a complete surrender. They're talking about a total commitment. He's saying, whoever totally commits to me, whoever totally surrenders to me. There was never in the mind of Christ the thought of half-hearted fellowship. Okay, be my insurance policy. Now I'm going to go back to living the way I want. It is a total commitment that he called for. Whoever follows me, whoever commits to me, whoever becomes my disciple, no longer will walk in darkness, but have the light of life in him. It brings a fellowship of light and life. Colossians 1:13 says, they are rescued from darkness domain and transferred to the kingdom of his beloved Son. 1 Thessalonians 5:5 says, we become sons of light and sons of day. Ephesians 5:8 says, those who were formerly darkness now are light in the Lord. Light in the Lord. All the promises of God that were conveyed when Jesus stood before that crowd to proclaim the truth of who he was and his purpose for coming to our world. So if you and I choose to become sons and daughters of the light, it brings us life forevermore. It brings us the presence of God in our hearts and our lives, and it allows us to share the burden that Jesus bore, the task that he had to be light bringers into the world round about us. Matthew 5:16 says, let your light shine before others. That means don't keep it inside. That means don't be ashamed. That means don't be bashful. Don't hold back. If you're his, we're supposed to let the world know. It's one of the reasons we give an invitation. There's something powerful about people who decide for Christ to take a stand for him in front of others. It's what Jesus expects because it's a witness. It's a testimony. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Let me say one more thing. That means it's a personal word. He wants to be the light in your life and in my life. In order for that to happen, we have to choose. Don't pay attention. They're coming up. They know I'm getting ready to offer an invitation. I've told them to do that. Pay attention here. Catch this. Personal word. He wants to be your light. But you have to choose. If you don't know Jesus Christ, you don't have light in your life. If you never put your faith in him, you're still in darkness. Spiritual, intellectual, moral darkness. And it's all around us. But he'll be your light if you'll choose him. So we are going to sing a song. I am going to stand here. I'm going to stand here for the express purpose of inviting anyone here to come into the light if they don't know him. To not hold back. To step forth and choose what he offered. Not be like the crowd and find a reason to resist or to procrastinate. But to step forward for Jesus. Are you here today? And you need the light that only he can offer? Come, let me introduce you to the light.